Hello everybody and welcome to chapter 2 of the book of Shemot as we continue to travel through Tanach. Chapter 2 has 25 verses and it starts at the bottom of page 356 and 357 in the Koren Sachs Chumash. In this chapter we read about the birth of Moshe, our great leader, although his birth is recorded anonymously. We read about how his mother has to hide him because Pharaoh has issued this decree that all baby boys should be thrown into the river. And so after a few months, she puts him in a basket and floats him down the river Nile. It's Pharaoh's daughter who ends up rescuing him, and she gives him the name Moshe. And he grows up between worlds. On the one hand, he's growing up with Egyptian privilege, while on the other hand knowing that he is a Hebrew and seeing his people in pain. At one point while he is out, he witnesses an Egyptian beating a slave, and in response Moshe kills him. And when he is most at risk of being discovered, he has to flee Egypt. He arrives in Midian, and over there he defends Yitro's daughters at a well, and he ends up marrying one of these daughters, Tzipporah, and he becomes a shepherd. Meanwhile, back in Egypt, our chapter ends by telling us about the people crying out under the crushing slavery. And that will set us up for chapter 3, where Moshe will take on full responsibility for redeeming the Jewish people. With that introduction in mind, let us turn to chapter 2, verse 1. Vayelech ish mebeis Levi. A man of the house of Levi went, Vayikach es bas Levi, and married a daughter of Levi. And our rabbis point out that this man is none other than Moshe's father Amram, and this woman is none other than Moshe's mother Yocheved. They had actually been married already, and given birth to Miriam and to Aaron. And it seems that because of the decree against the Jewish babies, Amram and Yocheved decided that they should no longer be together in case they end up having another child. It's actually Miriam behind the scenes who points out the flaw in this logic, because by not having more children they will certainly not be putting any baby boys in danger, but they're also not allowing for any baby girls to be born either. So as a result of Miriam's encouragement, they end up remarrying, and they indeed have a child. Verse 2, Vatahar ha'isha, the woman became pregnant. Vateled ben, and she gave birth to a son. Vatera osoki tovhu, and she saw that he was good. Vatitzpanehu shlosha yorachim, and she hid him for 3 months. It's amazing how much there is to unpack in just these 2 verses. Why is she hiding him for 3 months? Our rabbis explain that he was born 3 months premature, so the Egyptians didn't actually know that they had given birth yet to a baby boy, and so they were able to hide him without the Egyptians cottoning on. Our rabbis also point out a beautiful message as to why the Torah would keep this couple anonymous. And the reason is because if we were to know that these were 2 very important people, Amram and Yocheved, who gave birth to Moshe, then we would be tempted to think that one can only succeed, one can only be a great leader like a Moshe if you are born to good parents. So instead, the Torah tells us that it's just 2 anonymous people who give birth to Moshe, and that should give us all hope and encouragement that we too can achieve greatness, even if we're not born with silver spoons in our mouths. Verse 3, V'lo yochla od hatzfino, and she couldn't hide him any longer. Vatikach lo tevas gomer, so she took for him a wicker basket, Vatachmara v'chemar uvazofes, and she coated it with tar and pitch. Vatasem ba es hayeled, and she put the child in it. Vatasem basuf al sfas hayaor, and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the river Nile. Verse 4, Vateisatsa v'achoso merachok, and his sister stood by at a distance, Ledea ma yeyaseh lo, to see what would happen to him. So Miriam stands by the bank of the Nile as well and watches as this basket works its way downstream. And it's interesting because it doesn't actually say explicitly that the basket was floating downstream, and yet that is the imagery that we have been conditioned to accept from childhood. And it's important to store this moment in your memory where Miriam is watching over her baby brother, because this will become relevant much, much later on in the book of Bamidbar, when Miriam contracts leprosy, contracts tzara'as, and the Jewish people wait for her for 7 days as a reward for the fact that she stood by Moshe's side in this chapter. Verse 5, Vatered bas paro lirchotz al hayaor. Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river. V'naroseha halchos al yad hayaor, while her attendants walked by the riverbank. Vatere es hateva b'sochasuf. She saw the basket among the reeds. Vatishlach es amasa vatikacheha. And there are different ways that these words get translated. One translation is that she sent her maidservant to collect it, while another explanation is that she extended her arm to be able to collect the basket, and a miracle happened, and her arm stretched and stretched and stretched and stretched, a bit like the guy from the Fantastic Four, to be able to retrieve the basket herself. Verse 6, Vatiftach, and she opened it, Vatir'ehu es hayeled, and she saw the child, V'hinei nar bocher, and behold, a youth was crying. And our rabbis point out that both these words are being used to describe Moshe. On the one hand, he's a yeled, on the one hand is a little boy, and on the other hand is a nar, is a youth. And there are different explanations for this. Vatachmol alav, she took pity on him. Vatomer, and she said, Miyaldei ha'ivrim zeh, this must be one of the Hebrew boys. Verse 7, Vatomer achoso el bas paro, then his sister, Moshe's sister Miriam, said to the daughter of Paro, Ha'elech v'karasi lach isha meinekes min ha'evriyos. Shall I go and fetch one of the wet nurses from amongst the Hebrew women, v'seinik lach es hayaled, to nurse the child for you? And our rabbis point out that Moshe refused to nurse from any of the Egyptian wet nurses, which is why Miriam asks here to go and fetch a Hebrew one. Verse 8, Vatomer la bas Paro lechi, Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. Vatelech ha'alma, the girl went, Vatikra esem hayaled, and she called the child's mother. Verse 9, Vatomer la bas Paro, and Pharaoh's daughter told her, Hey lichi es hayeled hazeh, take this child, ve'nikihu li, nurse him for me, va'ani atein es scharech, and I will pay you your wage. Vatikacha isha hayeled vatnikehu. So the woman took the child and nursed him. And beneath these anonymous layers, what's really happening is that the daughter of Pharaoh, who is supposed to be putting these children to death, has just broken that most important rule. And not only that, but has just agreed to pay Moshe's mother to be able to nurse her own child. Verse 10, Vayigdal hayeled, the boy grew up, Vataviyehu levas Paro, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, Vayhi la levain, and he became her son. Vatikra shemo Moshe, and she named him Moshe. Vatomer, and she said, Ki min hamayim meshisihu, I drew him out of the water. Verse 11, Vayhi bayamim hahem, it happened in those days, Vayigdal Moshe, that Moshe grew up, Vayetze elechav vayar b'sivlosam, and he went out to his people, and he observed their burdens, Vayar ish mitzri makeh ish ivri me'echav, and he saw an Egyptian man striking one of his brethren, one of the Hebrew men. And our rabbis point out that he was raised to know that he was part of the Ivrim. And in fact, our rabbis even explain that the daughter of Pharaoh converted, so to speak, to be like the Hebrews. Verse 12, Vayifen kovacho, he looked this way and that way, Vayar ki ein ish, and he saw that there was no man there. Vayaches ha-mitzri, and he struck down the Egyptian, Vayitmenehu bachol, and he hid the body in the sand. Verse 13, Vayetze bayom hasheni, he went out on the next day, the second day, V'nei shnei anashim ivrim nitzim, and he saw two Hebrews fighting. Vayomer larasha lama sakereyecha, and he asked the guilty one, why are you striking your own neighbor? Verse 14, Vayomer, and he said, Mi samcha leish sar v'shofet aleinu, who made you a ruler and judge over us? Halahargeni ata omer kasher haragta es hamitzri, do you intend to kill me as you killed that Egyptian? Vayira Moshe, Moshe became afraid. Vayomar, and he said, Achein noda hadavar, and he realized that the matter had become known. Verse 15, Vayishma Paro es hadavar hazeh, Paro heard about this matter. Vayivakesh laharagos Moshe, and he sought to kill Moshe. Vayivrach Moshe mipnei Pharaoh, so Moshe fled from before Pharaoh. Vayeshev be'eretz Midian, Vayeshev ala be'er, and he went to live in the land of Midian, and there he sat down beside a well. Verse 16, L'chohen Midian sheva banos, the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, Vatavona, Vatidlena, Vatmalena, Eser hatim l'hashkos son avihen, and they came to draw water, and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Verse 17, Vayavo'u haroim vayigarashum, the shepherds came and drove them away. Vayakam Moshe vayoshian, but Moshe stood up to defend them, Vayashk es sonam, and then watered their sheep. Verse 18, Vatavona el Reuel avihen, they came to Reuel, their father, And our rabbis point out that this is actually Yisro, but Yisro had several names. Vayomer, and he said, Madua miharten bo hayom. How is it that you have come back so quickly today? Verse 19, Vatomalar, and they said, Ish Mitzri hitzilanu miad aroyim. An Egyptian man rescued us from the shepherds. V'gam dalo dalal lanu. He even drew water for us. Vayashk es hatzon, and watered the flock. Verse 20, Vayomer el benosav, and he asked his daughters, Va'ayo, where is he? Lama zeh azavtem es ha'ish. Why did you leave him there? Kir en lo vayochal lachem. Invite him in to have something to eat. Verse 21, Vayoel Moshe la sheves es ha'ish. Moshe accepted the invitation to stay with the man. Vayitein es Tzipora vito le Moshe. And he gave Moshe his daughter Tzipora in marriage. Verse 22, Vateled bein, she gave birth to a son, Vayikra es Shemot Gershom. And he named him Gershom, Ki Omar, for he said, Ger hayisi be'eretz nochriya. I've been a stranger in a foreign land. Verse 23, Vayhi bayamim harabim hahem. After many days, Vayamas melech Mitzrayim. The king of Egypt died. Although our rabbis point out that he didn't literally die, rather he contracted leprosy, and our sources teach that someone who contracts leprosy is considered dead. And they justify this because really, if the king of Egypt had literally died, then the Israelites would have been happy. And yet, we see the following, Vaye'anchu v'nei Yisrael minho avoda vayizaku. The children of Israel groaned because of the work, and they cried out, Vatal shavasam el ha'elohim minho avoda. And their outcry because of the work went up to God. Verse 24, Vayishma Elohim es na'kasam. Hashem heard their groaning. Vayizkor Elohim es briso. And he remembered his covenant. Es Avraham with Avraham, es Yitzchak ve'es Yaakov. With Yitzchak and with Yaakov. And finally, verse 25, Vayar Elohim es b'nei Yisrael. Hashem saw the children of Israel. Vayeda Elohim. Hashem knew that it was time to put their redemption into motion. And that brings us to the end of chapter 2. In chapter 3, we'll read about Moshe and the burning bush. I look forward to learning that with you soon. And in the meantime, have a wonderful and meaningful day.